Nicolas Fouquet's story began on January 27, 1615, when he was born to François Fouquet and Marie de Maupia. A couple lived in Paris. His father worked as a judicial officer and counselor to the Parliament of Paris. His mother belonged to an influential family of lawyers, who were well connected to financial affairs of the state. Nicolas Fouquet studied for his law degree at the Parisian Faculty of Law, and in a few years' time, his father helped him to buy for himself the position of Master of Requests, which was a council of the French Council of State. In 1640, when he was just 25 years old, Nicolas married Louise Fourche, who had considerable wealth. Shortly after, his father died, and Nicolas inherited some of his wealth. His wife also died the following year, leaving behind a 6-month-old daughter. In 1651, when he was 36 years old, Nicolas married again. His new wife's family was one of the wealthiest in Europe. Nicolas Fouquet served as superintendent of finances under Louis XIV. In the first years of his reign, Nicolas was a generous man who loved lavish parties, pretty women, and poetry. He also loved money, for he led an extravagant lifestyle. Fouquet was clever and very much indispensable to the king, so when the prime minister, Jules Mazarin, died, in 1661, the finance minister expected to be named the successor. Instead, the king decided to abolish the position. This and other signs made Fouquet suspect that he was falling out of favor, and so he decided to gain favor with the king by staging the most spectacular party the world had ever seen. The party's ostensible purpose would be to commemorate the completion of Fouquet's impressive house, Vaux le Vicomte, but its real function was to pay tribute to the king, the guest of honor. The most brilliant nobility of Europe and some of the greatest minds of the time attended the party. Molière wrote a play for the occasion, in which he himself was to perform at the evening's conclusion. The party began with a lavish 7-course dinner, featuring foods from the Far East never before tasted in France, as well as new dishes created especially for the night. The meal was accompanied with music commissioned by Fouquet to honor the king. After dinner there was a walk through the château's gardens. The grounds and fountains of Vaux-le-Vicomte were to be the inspiration for Versailles. Fouquet personally accompanied the young king through the geometrically aligned arrangements of flower beds. Arriving at the gardens' canals, they witnessed a fireworks display, which was followed by the performance of Molière's play. The party ran well into the night and everyone agreed it was the most amazing affair they had ever attended. The next day, Fouquet was arrested by the king's head musketeer, D'Artagnan. 3 months later he went on trial for stealing from the country's treasury. Actually, most of the stealing he was accused of he had done on the king's behalf and with the king's permission. Fouquet was found guilty and sent to the most isolated prison in France, high in the Pyrenees mountains, where he spent the last 20 years of his life in solitary confinement. To succeed Fouquet, Louis chose Jean-Baptiste Colbert, a man famous for his extreme stinginess and for giving the dullest parties in Paris. Colbert made sure that any money liberated from the treasury went straight into Louis's hands. With the money, Louis built a palace even more magnificent than Fouquet's, the glorious Palace of Versailles. He used the same architects, decorators, and garden designer. And at Versailles, Louis hosted parties even more extravagant than the one that cost Fouquet his freedom. Louis XIV, the Sun King, was a proud and arrogant man who wanted to be the center of attention at all times. He could not consent to being outdone in lavishness by anyone, and certainly not his finance minister. The evening of the party, as Fouquet presented spectacle on spectacle to Louis, each more magnificent than the one before, he imagined the affair as demonstrating his loyalty and devotion to the king. Not only did he think the party would put him back in the king's favor, he thought it would show his good taste, his connections, and his popularity, making him indispensable to the king and demonstrating that he would make an excellent prime minister. Instead, however, each new spectacle, each appreciative smile bestowed by the guests on Fouquet, made it seem to Louis that his own friends and subjects were more charmed by the finance minister than by the king himself, and that Fouquet was actually flaunting his wealth and power. Rather than flattering Louis XIV, Fouquet's elaborate party offended the king's pride. Louis would not admit this to anyone, of course. Instead, he found a convenient excuse to rid himself of a man who had unknowingly made him feel insecure. Everyone has insecurities. When you show yourself in the world and display your talents, you naturally stir up all kinds of resentment, envy, and other manifestations of insecurity. This is to be expected. You cannot spend your life worrying about the petty feelings of others. With those above you, however, you must take a different approach. When it comes to power, outshining the master is perhaps the worst mistake of all. Never imagine that because the master loves you, you can do anything you want. Entire books could be written about favorites who fell out of favor by taking their status for granted, for daring to outshine. Remember the following: never take your position for granted and never let any favors you receive go to your head. Knowing the dangers of outshining your master, you can turn this law to your advantage. If you are more intelligent than your master, for example, seem the opposite, make him appear more intelligent than you. Act naive. Make it seem that you need his expertise. Commit harmless mistakes that will not hurt you in the long run but will give you the chance to ask for his help. Masters adore such requests. A master who cannot bestow on you the gifts of his experience may direct rancor, hostility, and ill will at you instead. If your ideas are more creative than your master's, attribute them to him, in as public a manner as possible. Make it clear that your advice is merely an echo of his advice. If you are naturally more sociable and generous than your master, be careful not to be the cloud that blocks his radiance from others. He must appear as the sun around which everyone revolves, radiating power and brilliance, the center of attention. Learn from Fouquet or pay the price. In all of these cases it is not a weakness to disguise your strengths if in the end they lead to power. By letting others outshine you, you remain in control, instead of being a victim of their insecurity. This will all come in handy the day you decide to rise above your inferior status. If, like Galileo, you can make your master shine even more in the eyes of others, then you are a godsend and you will be instantly promoted. Never ever outshine your master. Robert Greene, 48 Laws of Power.